right, so welcome everyone to Enhanced Wellness Living's Women's Hormone Health Summit. We are thrilled to have you here or watching along with us. Today, we're going to be digging into understanding your menstrual cycle. And so, Kelly Engelmann, our founder and lead functional medicine nurse practitioner, is going to be walking through some of this education for us. And we're going to go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Chelsea, thank you so much. I want to give a shout out to Chelsea and Abby and really the whole Enhanced Wellness Living team. When we started thinking about, what are people asking for? Where are we seeing holes in the community in regards to hormone health? We decided that we needed to put the summit together because we have people calling in. And if you're listening to this recording after the fact, this was made just for you too, because we had people calling in asking questions about hormones, and there seemed to be a really big disconnect between hormone balancing and what they were asking for in hormone therapy, meaning that maybe they thought that just because their testosterone was low or their estrogen was low, that's all they needed. But we know that hormone balance is so much more. And then for those of you that have been with us, I oftentimes get to sit with you in your consults and then, of course, during your lab review visit. And I would oftentimes hear, nobody ever told me. Nobody ever told me that 10 years on birth control pills cumulatively over my lifespan increased my cancer risk pretty dramatically. Nobody ever told me that lack of estrogen over time increased my risk for dementia and osteoporosis. Nobody ever told me estrogen balance is important for cardiovascular health. And so those questions keep coming up. And it's sad to me that people, number one, don't understand those things. And number two, have fear around hormones and around hormone balancing. So that's why we're here today, to really dig into these concepts and help you understand how your body works, how we can be doing things and building a lifestyle that promotes hormone balance, not just today, but as we move throughout our life cycles. So we get to host this series. Today we're going to talk about exclusively the menstrual cycle. Again, I can't tell you how many women coming in to me don't really understand their cycle. And so we're going to dig into that. Some of this is going to seem really basic for some of you, and that's okay. It's a refresher. As adults, we learn through repetition or we learn through emotional impact. And I don't believe in scaring people. I don't believe in fear-based medicine. I believe in really having the repetition and learning. And so thank you for spending the time with us today. So my background, I got to spend, and Chelsea, you can advance, I got to spend my first 8 years in women's health, cutting my teeth as a practitioner. And I loved that practice. I loved my doctors. I loved my patients. But being there 8 years gave me a very unique vantage point in that I was seeing the best standard of care available. No lie. We cared for our patients. We did everything standard of care said to do. But I was watching them as they aged, and I was watching changes happen. So by the time our patients were hitting about 50, chronic disease states were starting to set in. So high blood pressure, dysregulation in blood sugar, mood changes, sleep disturbance, all of those things that despite them being active, despite them eating, a balanced diet according to the USDA guidelines, they were seeing these things set in. And my inquiring mind, my inquisitive, curious mind was like, there's got to be more to the story. And then to add to that, it was during the time when the Women's Health Initiative study came out in 2002, where we had to take all women off hormones. And true enough, we were using synthetic hormones. We were using Premarin and Prempro because that's all we had. We didn't have bioidentical hormones. But it was another time where it really highlighted the lack of availability of tools in our toolbox to adequately support women throughout their life cycles. So I went back and I got my second master's in metabolic and nutritional medicine. And once I learned, I couldn't unlearn. And so when I developed this practice at Enhanced Wellness Living, from the very beginning, it was based on hormone therapy, but with the foundation of nutrition and lifestyle. Because what I learned was with lifestyle medicine, we can do a whole lot. We have a whole lot of power in controlling our hormones and balancing our hormones just with the lifestyle that we lead. So we're going to dig into that today. And I hope to give you some tools that you can leave with to help balance your hormones better. If you're looking to make an appointment for hormone balancing, hopefully this will give you kind of a vantage point of seeing how we do things here at Enhanced Wellness Living differently with hormones, and really fuel a conversation that we can have during a consult. So why is it important to balance our hormones, right? Hormones do everything. Everything from our energy to our mood to our sleep to our metabolism. Definitely, it affects our reproductive health, and we'll dig into that a little bit more in a session in the future. We'll talk a lot about reproductive health. And then, of course, how we age. You look at people, how they age, and they age differently if they're hormone balanced versus not hormone balanced. Inflammation can get really out of control when we don't have adequate hormone balance. And we're not just talking about hormone levels, we're talking about the balance of those hormones. So hormones are important. Hormones do a lot for the body. We have hundreds of hormones in the body, and the body, we have estrogen up on the screen, but hormones work in a symphony. It's not just one hormone that does all the work. And we need them working in a symphony. That symphony is so, so important. So when we think about hormone balance, there are 4 phases that we oftentimes talk about during our life cycle of hormone production, right? And so we're producing hormones even before puberty. We are producing hormones. They start surging during puberty, and that's when we start our premenopausal time frame is actually at the onset of our menstrual cycle. Most females are going to start their cycle when they hit about 100 pounds. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. The age is very varied, anywhere from 9 years old to 13, sometimes 16 years old, depending on body composition. But we need a certain amount of fat in order to start stimulating production of those eggs, or not production of the eggs, but release of those eggs. So we think about the eggs. Let's go back to that conversation, because I think that's a big conversation to be had too, because the impact that the things that we're doing for lifestyle have the ability to impact 3 generations. So let me say that again in a different way. So your eggs that you're born with are all the eggs you're ever going to have. Those eggs that you're born with were inside your mom when you were in utero. The egg that you came from was inside your grandmother. So when we affect someone's hormone health prior to having children, for a female anyway, we're able to affect 3 generations. And to me, that is so, so incredibly powerful. And that fuels a lot of what we do here at Enhanced Wellness Living, because we want to make generational change. We need some generational change in the way that we are having healthy babies that thrive. And so at menses, at the onset of menses, that starts a period where we are ovulating. But we may ovulate unpredictably. So oftentimes we'll have moms call in for their daughters, maybe they're 13 to 15, and they had a cycle or 2, and then they stopped having cycles, and they're worried, there's something wrong. There may not be anything wrong, right? The body's still learning how to release those eggs in a timely manner. So it may take a couple of years of being having menstrual cycles before everything completely regulates. Having said that, if there are underlying things like dysregulated blood sugar or weight gain around the middle that's just not resolving after puberty, then maybe that is a situation where we want to dig in, we want to do some testing, and we want to figure out like what's driving that. But it can be very unpredictable when we first start having menstrual cycles. But as we map out these 4 phases of our life, I don't think they're very well done. I think these descriptions bleed into each other and creates a lot of confusion. One of the questions that we had asked before we started doing this production was, what is perimenopause? And that's so confusing for people because it's not a distinct time and period, okay? So for most women, perimenopause lasts about 10 years. So it's a time when hormones start to shift beyond predictable fertility. So we may have some symptoms one month and not have symptoms the next month. We may skip some menstrual cycle. We may have decreased libido. But basically, it's when hormone balance becomes a problem. So if we're not ovulating predictably, progesterone oftentimes is not being produced predictably. And that may show up as irritability, anxiety, lack of sleep, and it can be very distressing. You're just not feeling yourself. So that may be the first thing that happens during your perimenopausal phase. Another thing that can oftentimes happen is we can get estrogen dominant, which is really, really interesting. We get a lot of estrogens, and we'll talk about a little bit later through our food sources and environmentally. But we also produce estrogen in our fat tissue. Okay. We also make estrogen through our adrenal glands. So it doesn't take much of that accumulation effect to create a situation where we're estrogen dominant. So sometimes we're estrogen dominant because we are exposed to too much estrogen or making too much estrogen. Sometimes we're estrogen dominant because we don't make enough progesterone. So we can have low estrogen and low progesterone and still be estrogen dominant, or we can have high estrogen and low progesterone and be estrogen dominant. And so it can fall all across the board. So understand the confusion about perimenopause because it is such a challenging time and it can be so long. For some women, perimenopause is very short. They may have a non-event. In fact, in Japan, there's not really a true word for menopause because women just stop having cycles and it's not really something that they experience symptoms because hormones for them, because of their lifestyle, typically stay more balanced. And then menopause is an interesting definition too. So with menopause, we define that as being 12 months without a menstrual cycle. So you may go 3 months without a menstrual cycle and all of a sudden have a cycle, and that clock starts right back over according to conventional definitions. And so we call you menopausal when you've had 12 consecutive cycles, or without 12 consecutive cycles on the calendar. And then the next day you're postmenopausal, right? And so it's just interesting the way we have chosen to define these things. And it lends to a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, a lot of misinformation about where you are. And so as we approach hormone balance here at Enhanced Wellness Living, we believe in helping you learn your body. We believe using tools like testing, but also sometimes wearables, sometimes at-home testing to help you determine, like, where are you? And then what could you be doing that's going to make the most impact so that you have smooth transitions as your hormones change, not just throughout your menstrual cycle, but also through the seasons of life. So how do we navigate hormone health during fertility years? And this can be tricky. Again, there's a lot of environmental influences that happen that dictate how your hormones are expressed. And I think if you don't learn anything else today, this would be one thing that I want to make sure you truly, truly understand. And I feel like if women understood this concept better, our conversations would be way different in regards to hormone therapy. So when we think about hormones, there are ways that as clinicians, we're looking through the lens of testing and hearing your stories about your symptoms, but we're thinking about production. Are you producing enough hormone? Are your ovaries producing enough estrogen, progesterone, testosterone? Are your adrenal glands, adrenal glands are responsible for your stress response, but they produce about 50% of your sex hormones through a mechanism of DHEA. Are you making enough? So production is part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is, can you process those hormones? Just because you can produce the hormones doesn't mean you can process those hormones. Processing of those hormones happens in the liver and happens in your gut. And so we spend a lot of time on gut health, the health of your gut microbiome. It's so, so, so very important when we think about processing these hormones. And then the third component is what we call proteomics, but that is where the hormone gets into the cell for activity. The hormone cannot do anything if it can't get intracellular. And so the things that will prevent intracellular uptake of the hormone or other hormones being imbalanced, like cortisol being high, will prevent estrogen from getting intracellular. Inflammation and drivers of inflammation, think of them as a block around that cell. It doesn't allow those hormones to get intracellular. So you could be prescribed the best hormone in the world. You could be making enough hormone to support your needs. But if it can't get intracellular, we have all these pesky symptoms. So what are the symptoms? So PMS is oftentimes a symptom that irritability, bloating, mood swings, sometimes insomnia, fatigue that happens in that luteal phase of your cycle. So, it's like I hear people say, I turn into a different person during that phase of my cycle. I don't even know who I am during that time. And that's PMS. Oftentimes having irregular cycles. And let's talk about that, because sometimes we call irregular cycles, they're regular, they're just not 28 days. So a regular menstrual cycle can vary. So 23 days to about 32 to 34 days can be normal, right? That may be normal for you. As long as it's predictable each month within a few days, then that can be a regular cycle for you, even though it may be short or a little bit longer. Other symptoms I mentioned would be mood swings, fatigue, and those can be caused because of fluctuations in hormones. And we'll go through the menstrual cycle and show you how hormones truly fluctuate throughout the month. They're supposed to fluctuate, right? And then I talked earlier about the impact of environment. So there are things in the environment like hormone disruptors, plastics, antibiotics added to our food sources, that impact how our hormones are utilized. And then no one likes to talk about it, but caffeine and alcohol, guys, these can be tremendous endocrine disruptors. They can dysregulate sleep, they can spike cortisol. And it's not that all alcohol is bad, depending on the timing, right? And that all caffeine is bad, but it's where are you in your ability to handle those things? If your liver is really healthy and things are moving along, you may process alcohol just fine on occasion. Obviously, we wouldn't want to be consuming daily alcohol, but having you go through a process of removing those things for a period of time and see how does my body respond to not having those. Sometimes that can be the hardest thing people have to grasp when we're thinking about hormone balancing and how do we discover that. So one of the things that we like to do in the very beginning of a program, if you're in a program with us, is have you complete a 21-day metabolic reset. And this can be especially important for patients that are truly seeking hormone balance or patients that are really struggling with gut health, because it is the most profound thing that you can walk yourself through and really, really see changes in your body in a very short period of time. So basically, that's 21 days of an anti-inflammatory diet. We do remove things that we know for sure create inflammation. And alcohol and caffeine are removed during that time. And we have you taking some key nutrients to help build up metabolic reserves. So that 21-day period, I'm always amazed when I see patients back and look at their in-body. That's a test that we can do here, looking at body composition, looking at shifting in body composition, cellular health, and then hearing their stories, like what changed during that time. It's a tremendous lesson in the capacity of the body to gain balance before we even start adding hormones to the mix. It's a really, really good lesson. Also, I mentioned stress. When I think about hormone balance, there's 5 components that really need to be in place in order to continue to have hormone balance long term. I can put you on hormones all day long and get you balanced for a few months. But if we don't deal with these 5 things, then hormones just don't balance long term. So the first is nutrition. The second is detox. The third is stress or sleep. Sleep and stress, I would put those into the same category. The fourth is movement. Your body is designed and meant to move. And that doesn't mean over-exercise. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the fifth is hormone balance. Without those other 4 things, it's really, really difficult to have any meaningful hormone balance long-term. Now, all of those things don't have to be perfect. And we do believe in kind of intuitive living. So you're living in a way that kind of flows with what you're trying to accomplish at the time. But those are foundational principles that if we don't adequately address, we'll be frustrated long term with hormone balance and disillusioned with what hormones have the ability to do, honestly. So let's talk about the 4 phases of a menstrual cycle. Okay, this is where we can get a little basic. Some of you know this like the back of your hand, and some of this may be new information for our patients that have daughters that they want listening to this information. I wanted to be basic enough that they could listen to this and actually understand what's going on. So the first phase is actually the menstrual cycle, and that starts on day 1 of the cycle. So the first day that you start to bleed would be day 1 of your cycle. There are lots of apps now that make this easy to track. I really like the Flow app. That seems to be easy to use for people to track these cycles. So if you are one that likes to use apps for things, that may be one to use for cycle tracking. This is where the endometrial lining is shedding. And I had a patient recently tell me in her 50s, she had no idea that's what was actually happening when I had a menstrual cycle, right? I didn't know. And that's okay. Regardless of your age, it's never too late to learn. But that's when the menstrual cycle, the endometrial lining is shedding. And the length of that cycle can vary. It averages about 5 days, but for some women, it may be just 1 or 2 days. For some women, it may be more like 7 days. The start of the menstrual cycle is also the start of the follicular phase. And that follicular phase is when the ovaries are starting to prepare for the egg. So that lining has to slough first, and then the follicle starts getting ready to be released. And then the follicle is released, and that's ovulation. And that happens around day 14 of the cycle. Again, that can vary from person to person. And then after ovulation starts the luteal phase. And that's when, ovulation can happen, pregnancy can happen. If your body becomes pregnant during that time, then that follicle is nourished and has a nice little bed to lay in to adhere to that uterine lining and become nourished. If you don't become pregnant with that cycle, then that menstrual cycle starts over and you slough that cycle. So again, we're saying that this is a 28-day cycle, but the length of that can vary from person to person and can vary throughout your fertility years as well. So I wanted to put some things out here about cycling for syncing your cycle and living in a way that supports your menstrual cycle, right? For a lot of us, we are running and gunning, and we're not really living in a way that supports a normal, healthy menstrual cycle and supports the body when what it's really trying to do. So I thought it would be helpful to give you just some helpful hints of things that you can do during the different phases of your cycle that help your body function better. And these, again, are just general guidelines. It doesn't mean you have to do this every single cycle, but for some women, this can be a life-changing way of living. So during the menstrual phase, we want to do things that are very supportive to the body. When you think about food, you want to think about foods that are higher in iron, high in antioxidants, so lots of fruits and vegetables. You may crave things that are a little bit more savory. You may want some broths and stews and organ meats, eggs, things like that that are really nourishing to the body and have choline. You definitely want to avoid foods that are high salt and spicy, caffeine, sugar. Those kind of things are going to disrupt hormones. So any of that you can eliminate or avoid during that time. And oftentimes this is when we're craving, right? You're like, what? You want me to remove these things that I'm craving so bad? If you're craving these foods during your menstrual cycle, that is a sign that some things are off hormonally, like the adrenals. If you're craving salt a lot, that could be low adrenal function. And there's other ways that we can help you address that. Sometimes using really good electrolytes can help. But pay attention to those symptoms during this cycle. You may notice symptoms of low energy fatigue. That can be okay for a day or two. We don't want that to be the whole menstrual cycle, right? If it's the whole menstrual cycle, we need to dig in and kind of figure that out. But if you're noticing some of these subtle symptoms, these are the things that you can do. Movement's also really important. I mentioned the body is meant to move. But during this phase of your cycle, you may do better with things like yoga, stretching, walking, taking some Epsom salt baths. Things are very nourishing to the body. Oftentimes with workouts, we get on a kick, right? And we're doing CrossFit really, really hard all month long. And I'm saying, go girl. I mean, I love to move, but if you're struggling with hormone balance, it may not be the best strategy for that time of your cycle. So think about things that you can do at lower impact. If you're in a CrossFit gym and you don't want to miss the workout, maybe just dialing it down a little bit, not being so competitive during that time of your cycle. If you're used to running and running is your thing, maybe do some run walking. Just slow down the pace a little bit. Your body will thank you for that. The next phase of the cycle is that follicular phase. This is a time where you may have more energy. You may be more creative. You may be wanting to do some of those things that are more high energy. So this would be the time when you could do some cardio and swimming and things that are a little bit more interactive and creative. Food wise, you want to think about things that energize you. You know, how could you be feeding yourself in a way that gives you energy long term? So I would say avoiding things higher carbs, staying a little bit lower carb, but high in the vegetable category, and really, really, really high fiber. Again, you're going to see that same list of avoid at the bottom through all phases of the cycle. And you're like, really? You want me to avoid? You know, minimize if you can't completely avoid it. You will notice that you will feel better. This time of your cycle can be a very productive time in the cycle if you're fueling your body in that way. And so these are just some really good guidelines. And then we move into the phase where we are in the ovulatory phase, right? And again, this is around day 14 of your cycle, and that bleeds into the luteal phase. You may still feel creative. This is typically when we get the biggest energy spurts. We may have an increased sex drive during that time. We may feel more productive. This is our creative energy. And so we want to use it in the best way possible. This is when you can get a lot of things done on your to-do list from a brain perspective. And then the next phase that we move into is that luteal phase. And again, that's right after ovulation. For some women, this is a time where things really get sticky. Okay. Some women really feel if they especially have low progesterone or if they're high stress, this is a more vulnerable time of the menstrual cycle. And so you may notice more moodiness. You may notice that you don't sleep as well. Some people will have digestive disturbance like diarrhea or bloating during this time. Those are those are really signs that things are off, right? We shouldn't be experiencing those things to that degree. You know, it's common to have a little bit lower energy during that time, but we shouldn't be experiencing severe symptoms during this time. So if you are experiencing that, that would be something we definitely want to talk about. We definitely want to dig into and figure out what is the best solution to help that settle out. I can't tell you how many women come in with that complaint. That's a very, very common complaint. And then after their 21-day metabolic reset, it has gone completely away. They're like, I don't know what you did, but it worked. And it goes away. For some women, it doesn't. For some women, we have to use some hormone replacement or have to do things a little bit more strategic in order to get them adequately balanced. But this is a time that's extremely vulnerable. This is also a time where we may see increased histamine challenges. For those of you that are histamogenic, you've had eczema, you've had allergies, you may notice that during this time your histamine becomes a problem. It's a very real thing. It has to do with progesterone imbalance. Guys, I don't know what happened to Chelsea. It looks like she dropped off. So let me see what I can do to get us up and going with the slides. I apologize. And then during our menstrual cycle, we can also cycle foods, okay? And this is meant to be a general guideline for you guys. And this will be something that we can put in the chat that you can print off and put on your fridge to remind you of the things that you want to focus on during the cycling of your menstrual cycle with foods in regards to food. So this is a really good guide. This is another guide. Again, we'll make it available so that you can print that and have that on your fridge, because I do believe in having some tools that you can go to. You're not having to think about this all the time, but you can just kind of look at your tool. I did mention, I'm just trying to make sure you guys are still here. I did mention that there are some things that we can do to dig a little bit deeper, especially if you're noticing challenges during your menstrual cycle. Seed cycling has been one of those things that has become popular, and it definitely works for women that are really struggling with menstrual cycle challenges. Adding some seeds to your diet, and listen, this is not a lot. This is just like 1 tablespoon of flax or pumpkin seed during that follicular phase, and then 1 tablespoon of sunflower or sesame seeds, right, daily. You can easily throw that into a smoothie on the top of a salad. These are easy things to get in and be able to promote hormone balance. So seed cycling can be a really good way of promoting hormone health. It really helps to balance out estrogen and progesterone. And I think, excuse me, one of the biggest things that it does is it helps with fiber intake and the omega-3s. And so again, this strategy is super simple, not taught often enough, and can make a huge impact on your hormone balance. And then I mentioned movement. It's really cool to be able to cycle sync your movement and pay attention to how you feel. Our body is meant to move every day. And so getting some type of movement that's appropriate for your cycle can be a huge way of helping your hormones balance, really harnessing the ability of the hormones to stay balanced all cycle long. And then I alluded to some hormone disruptors. So we're going to talk about those hormone disruptors, and then we're going to talk about some swaps that you can make. Because learning about these hormone disruptors oftentimes can be overwhelming, and it can be like, oh my gosh, everything we're exposed to is really disrupting the hormones. And there's truth in that. Like, there's a lot of opportunity for hormone disruption in any given day. They say the average female puts about 270 chemicals on their body before they ever leave their house. And so the things that we do at home really do matter. So I think about clean air. So air filtration is really important for the home. Clean food, so buying organic when it's appropriate and when it's possible. And then if you can't get organic, washing properly. And then clean water. So using water filtration, not just in what you're drinking, but also what you're putting on your body. The chlorine, we were just traveling this weekend to Atlanta, and the hotel, the chlorine was so strong. And we all could tell a difference in exposure to that chlorine versus being at home. So there's a lot of opportunity for hormone disruption in the world that we live in today. And it definitely affects not only hormone production, hormone processing, but also the ability of that hormone to get intracellular. So it's a very, very important factor. And I say that's one of the reasons I really, really, really love having you guys do a metabolic reset a few times a year to help clean off those cell membranes. And then working on, of course, decreasing exposure. And so we think about plastics, water bottles, right? So using stainless steel containers when you can, antibiotics, avoiding when you can avoid antibiotics, because those have an effect as well. So lots of different things get into our body that have the ability to disrupt hormones. Alcohol's on there, gluten is on there, it's an anti-nutrient. Dairy is on there because of all the things that we put into our dairy in the United States. And so again, lots of opportunity. And the biggest endocrine disruptor that we have is actually sugar. And so sugar is very, very inflammatory to everyone. And oftentimes we consume more sugar than we actually realize. So hormone balancing tips, this is just a cool little graphic that shows you how easy it is to build a hormone balancing meal. So basically picking your protein, choosing a fat, choosing fiber. Fiber, again, is really, really important for hormone balancing and doesn't really get talked about enough. But making sure you're getting 25 to 35 grams of fiber, kind of count it and see what you're getting in. I am a believer in fiber supplementation just because it is challenging to get that much fiber in the diet. And so we have a few fiber supplements at the office that I do recommend, and I use one myself personally every single day. And then picking a starchy vegetable and getting variety with our vegetables is really, really important. I have the Practical Paleo book behind me. They do have some really good dessert options that aren't going to set you back. And so, you can have dessert. You just want to make sure you time that dessert well and that you're using good quality ingredients when you're preparing dessert. It doesn't have to be all strict. These are some swaps that we can use in our cleaning products. I love having these swaps. These are super, super easy to make or easy to acquire, and just make a big difference in our overall hormone balance. And yes, even the small things over time make the biggest impact. So I mentioned your water bottles. I didn't mention deodorant, but that can be also a challenge with the aluminum and with all the ingredients in there. So there are some natural deodorants today that we use. Plastic containers, I'm constantly having to get rid of plastic containers that other family members bring over. But using glass containers or silicone bags can be really helpful. Changing in our feminine hygiene products. And luckily we have some really cool things on the market today that they didn't have back in the day when I needed those things. So organic tampons are a thing. Menstrual cups work really, really well. Then our cookware, the things that we're using, especially on high heats to prepare our food, can impact our hormone balance. So non-stick cookware is, they have endocrine disruptors. So changing, again, control what you can control, right? Don't get overwhelmed with all these things, but control what you can control. So when it comes to hormone balance, one of the biggest things that we can do, I've mentioned the adrenal glands before, but your adrenal glands sit right above your kidneys. They're responsible. We think about them in the way of cortisol, but they also produce DHEA and lots of other hormones. But if we can balance our stress response, now we can't always control the stressors in our life, but we can balance our stress response, then our adrenal glands are our backup system for hormone production. Our body's amazing in the way that it builds a backup system. If we are under chronic stress over time, and there's not a way to completely resolve that stress, we know we're going to be in the weeds for a long time. That's when dialing in these hormone balancing lifestyle measures is really, really essential, because that chronic stress over time will definitely impact hormone balance, right? And so I hear people say all the time, I'm having to work so hard. And it's true. If we're under chronic stress over time, our methodologies have to be dialed in so much more. But there's simple things that you can be doing. Again, think simple, clean air, clean food, clean water. Manage your stress as best you can with practicing of self-care measurements. And, not all stress is bad. We need some element of stress to build resilience. We need to have that ability to bounce back. And in order to have that ability to bounce back, we have to have our gas tank full of nutrients. We definitely want to make sure that we're addressing underlying conditions. I mentioned inflammation earlier. Inflammation is a big driver of hormone dysregulation, and we could use the best hormone therapies in the world and not see a tremendous impact because of the drivers of inflammation. So as a clinician and as a team here at Enhanced Wellness Living, one of the things we're looking for are what are the things in your physiology that are driving inflammation. So some of those examples would be gut dysbiosis, having a very unhealthy gut microbiome. Poor blood sugar dysregulation is a tremendous impact on inflammation. Obesity is another. So accumulating body fat in areas that produce inflammatory cytokines can disrupt hormones. Thyroid conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, sleep apnea, all those things would definitely want to address along the way in order to, have hormone balance over our life cycle. And then there's lots of ways that we test hormones, right? And I oftentimes get asked this question, like, how do you test hormones? And I say, I do all of it, right? It really depends on the person. There's not a one test fits all in regards to hormone balancing. Blood testing for hormones can be very appropriate in the cycling female that is not perimenopausal yet. Once you get perimenopausal, it's very difficult to chase when is the appropriate time to test those hormones in blood. Blood testing is only showing us what's being produced. And I mentioned production is a thing, and sometimes we need to see production. Sometimes blood testing is appropriate, but it doesn't show us the whole picture. And then there's salivary testing. I've used salivary testing for the past 20 plus years. It's more stable, and it allows us to look not just at sex hormones, but also at adrenal hormones like cortisol, 17-hydroxyprogesterone and DHEA. Those are very key, important hormones when we're looking at hormone balancing. And then the one that I love the most, and I've used probably for the past 10 years, maybe 12 years, I think it's been out about that long, and I was an early adopter to that testing, but it's called Dutch testing, and it's dried urine testing for hormones. They use dried urine, and they also use salivary as part of their testing. Sometimes we just do urinary, sometimes we do a combination of urinary and salivary. But with that test, I'm able to look at production. I'm able to look at stress response. How are you balancing your cortisol? I'm able to look at melatonin. How well are you maintaining adequate hormones for sleep and repair? I'm able to look at key drivers of nutrients for hormone balance, oxidative stress levels, how you're processing your hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. So it really gives me a better look at where are you in the way of hormone balance. I like to do that test once a year for females that are really looking at hormone balance and making decisions about lifestyle in order to balance hormones for the long term. It can be a very impactful test to see. And so we're excited to be able to offer that to our patients and really have meaningful discussions around that testing. So I would say take charge of your hormone health. Be curious about your body. We want to partner with you in helping you learn like what is helping you, what is driving hormone balance for you, and what is not driving hormone balance for you, and how can we bridge that gap. Chelsea, were you able to join us again?
I've been here. Yes, thank you. Sorry, friends. In the future, I'll be using my hotspot. Yeah, so reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about what's an appropriate point for you, for family members. We really want this education to reach as many women as possible. I will say personally, I had no idea what my cycle looked like until infertility was a thing. So reach out. Let's talk about what's appropriate for you, whether it's testing, whether it's an initial consult. Maybe it's some sort of procedure that we offer for women's health. We want to individualize the care. So my contact information is there in the bottom right side. And you can always call our direct number on the website and ask for me as well. But I'll help you kind of navigate best next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. This was recorded, so we will have a recording available for patients that want to share this information. So you want to share it with someone in your life that really is struggling with hormone balance, or you just want them to understand their bodies better and what they could be doing. This is our gift back. We want to make sure this information gets out there. It's really about empowering women just like you to take charge of their hormonal health and have the conversations that need to be had. So thank you for being here.